Alrighty, Rudy. Sorry about the delay. Always busy debugging. Debugging my electric hot plate for heating up water because it decided not to work. Anyway, it's fixed. Took me too long, but here we are. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator pilot, Fragath, and today we're going to do more of Waldo, Genius in Orbit by Robert A. Heinlein. Good morning, Optical Antenna. Thanks for tuning in. So unfortunately, last week was a eclipse, and in my region it was total occultation in the path of totality. Name me a phrase more ominous than path of totality, by the way. There's something about that that sounds a little spooky. Not as spooky as the sirens going. Of course, I opened my window because it's a nice day and the siren's off. Anyway, um, hopefully this one will go a little smoother once I get to the next. Well, there are no chapters, but the next break. So I did have to interrupt a little closer in the middle of nowhere, no man's land. So I'm probably going to wind up accidentally doubling over some stuff that I've already read. He said, as he just lost his page. Good job. Where are you? Okay, now we did the Jenkins bit. Let's see, we did the bit with Baldur, his Waldo's dog, Ariel the canary, some sort of bird. Yes, a canary. In the coal mine? Space station. Where did we leave off? Something when they were going to get started on food. Whatever, I'll reread a bit. Just give me a sec here. So previously on, in the setting of Waldo, basically we have a company whose name I can't remember off the top of my head because I have a small brain on Mondays. Something power. Basically, there's a power company, and they have, if not a monopoly on power distribution, then it's rather a lot. So they've got a lot of people. North American Power Air, that's the name. And their company is based around a technology that allows them to basically broadcast or beam power through the ether into whatever receiving devices are necessary to do that. Part of the mechanisms necessary for doing this are a piece of equipment called a decalb, I believe, which is named after some guy, I believe. We will learn more about those, I think, shortly. Unfortunately, there seems to be a problem with their infrastructure, this company. North American Power Air, NAP. Or NAPA, NAPA. Interesting coincidence there. Their stuff is not working, or it's having unintended consequences, like, I don't know, flying cars falling out of the air, that sort of thing. So the chief engineer of this company, I think that's engineer supervisor or something, whose name eludes me at the moment, basically has set forth his task to communicate with this genius named Waldo, who refuses to work with this company because they stole some of his patents, poached some of his patents. And he did not take kindly to that. And basically, he wants to talk to him because he's a genius and might be able to help them with their problem because it could affect all of human civilization at this point because they're a very widespread company. It's pretty much like if Amazon Web Services and Cloudflare were to simultaneously be under the same banner and start failing simultaneously. It'd be pretty bad. Oh, wait, that's practically happening now. We're always a couple days away from that happening. So, a couple really solid, dedicated DDoS attacks away from that occurring, which is always a good time. So, no parables with current reality at all, is what I'm saying. Absolutely different. So, Waldo is a genius. He's got a crippling, debilitating illness that makes it so that his muscles don't work properly. He's very, very weak. So he lives in orbit because low gravity means having a lack of musculature is less of a burden, very literally. But also, he's invented a lot of devices, colloquially called Waldos, which are basically robotic arm analogs that he can control using levers and control interfaces in order to manipulate things. We're about to get a bigger view on what that's all about. At any rate, our chief engineer, perspective character, has gone to the one man that Waldo will actually communicate with, which is Waldo's doctor, the man actually who birthed Waldo, or was the doctor in charge of helping birth Waldo, whose name is... What's your name, lad? Grimes, Dr. Grimes. Or Uncle Gus, as he's referred to as well. Basically to get an in with Waldo and be like, hey, can you get me to see Waldo? I want to explain this problem because it's a really bad problem. The doc, of course, doesn't like the fact that power is being beamed everywhere. He thinks it's causing debilitating problems to people. So he wears like an armored suit everywhere. Basically, the equivalent of trying to wear a lead-lined outfit at all times. And he says it makes him feel better than before he was doing it, so maybe there's something to it, I don't know. The engineer calls him paranoid, but the doc is like, have you done any long-term tests, studies on the effects long-term? No, because it hasn't been around long enough for you to do that. And even if it were, you wouldn't want to, for obvious reasons. It would affect your entire economic model. It'd be bad for you. So you have a vested interest in not doing it. Maybe you should look into it, though, because maybe people are getting sicker. Or at least less robust. I think that basically catches us up. Honestly, I think that covers just about everything. So Waldo has a dog named Balder and a canary named Ariel. Ariel, whatever. So Stevens is his name, is the name of the engineer. Has managed to get an in with Doc Grimes to see Waldo, and they're about to eat dinner. Okay, so interesting things about Waldo. While I search for the page that I had set aside as a intelligent stopping point that wouldn't be too far out, but also would, be far enough out that it felt like we got something done today. Oh, where are you? I just flipped by it. There it is. Yes! We will take that. Okay. So sorry for the late start again. Yeah. I found where I wanted to be. So less on Waldo now, or Waldos. If you've ever heard of Waldos, in the context that this is bringing up in terms of a manipulated robotic arm, there's a reason for that. They're a real thing. There are robotic arms that we manipulate with levers, and they are often colloquially known as Waldos, uh, largely named after this story, because reality life imitates art. There we go. That's the phrase I'm looking for. It's been a long morning. Okay, forgive me. At any rate. So yeah, let's get cracking. More on that later. I don't remember when the first Waldos were built. I want to say it was a military application first, for like handling toxic material or something. But I don't actually remember off the top of my head. Where are you? Oh, geez. Here we go. Remote manipulators. So on this section on remote manipulators, as quoted from Wikipedia, the most reliable source imaginable, I know. A remote manipulator known as a telefactor, telemanipulator, or Waldo, after the 1942 short story Waldo by Robert A. Heinlein, which features a man who invents and uses such devices. It is a device which, through electronic, hydraulic, or mechanical linkages, allows a hand-like mechanism to be controlled by a human operator. The purpose of such a device is usually to move or manipulate hazardous materials for reasons of safety, similar to the operation and play of a claw crane game. Okay, that's engine maintenance, assembly, and disassembly factory. Where's an older one? 1945, here we go. In 1945, the company's Central Research Laboratories was given the contract to develop a remote manipulator for the Argonne National Laboratory. The intent was to replace devices which manipulated highly radioactive materials from above a sealed chamber or hot cell, with a mechanism which operated through the side wall of the chamber, allowing a researcher to stand normally while working. The result was the Master-Slave Manipulator Mark 8, or MSM-8, which became the iconic remote manipulator seen in newsreels and movies such as the Andromeda Strain or THX-1138. A Lucas film, if you've ever seen it, you probably thought it was incredibly boring and or depressing. It is! It is both of those. But also fairly interesting at times. Brings some interesting stuff to the table. Let's see, anything else interesting here? Robert Heinlein claimed a much earlier origin for my lips are already acting up. Robert Heinlein claimed a much earlier origin for remote manipulators. He wrote that he got the idea for Waldos after reading a 1918 article in Popular Mechanics about a poor fellow afflicted with myasthenia gravis, who devised complicated lever arrangements to enable him to use what little strength he had. An article in Science Robotics on robots, science fiction, and nuclear accidents discusses how the science fiction Waldos are now a major type of real-world robots used in the nuclear industry. So, really, anything involving teleoperation, this includes. Oh, geez. I mean, this is mecha relevant as hell. So, if you remember, really anything involving it's something that could reasonably be described as a robotic limb that uses something like human function would do. That owes its functionality concept to Waldo. Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man, for instance. Those are Waldos. He's using Waldos. They're fancy Waldos, but that's what they are. So yes, it's a thing. What are they called in? I want to say that was Ghost in the Shell, right? Had arm slaves, which were powered armor suits that you kind of moved around and you moved the limbs, and they did a more exaggerated version of whatever you were doing. Um, Anything like that. Hell, um, Escaflowne. Those would qualify as Waldos, although magitechnological in origin. Um, Basically anything like that. So you see, this is kind of foundational to the purpose for this stream, is my point. Anyway, this is a much longer aside than I had intended to do, because I found where I wanted to be. But where I'd rather be is right here, in the present moment, about to read at you. Alrighty. So with that, let's get cracking. Back on where we stopped last week, which was a bit of an abrupt interruption. We'll probably have a paragraph or two of overlap, but whatever. Let's get going. I don't remember what I used for character voices, so we're going to be somewhat faking it. I apologize. Ariel? Instead of replying, Waldo touched the keyboard of the voder, producing a musical whistling pattern of 3 notes. There was a rustling near the wall of the room, above them. A tiny yellow shape shot toward them, a canary. It sailed through the air with wings folded, bullet fashion. A foot or so away from Waldo, it spread its wings, cupping the air, beat them a few times with its tail down and spread, and came to a dead stop, hovering in the air with folded wings. Not quite a dead stop, perhaps, for it drifted slowly, came within an inch of Waldo's shoulder, let down its landing gear, and dug its claws into his singlet. Waldo reached up and stroked it with a fingertip. It preened. "No earth-hatched bird can learn to fly in that fashion," he stated. "I know. I lost half a dozen before I was sure they were incapable of making the readjustment. Too much thalamus." "What happened to them?" "In a man, you would call it acute anxiety psychosis. They try to fly. Their own prime skill leads them to disaster. Naturally, everything they do is wrong, and they don't understand it. Presently, they quit trying. A little later, they die. Of a broken heart, one might say, poetically." He smiled thinly. "But Ariel is a genius among birds. He came here as an egg. He invented, unassisted, a whole new school of flying." He reached up a finger, offering the bird a new perch, which it accepted. "That's enough, Ariel. Fly away home." The bird started the Bell Song from Lakme. He shook it gently. "No, Ariel, go to bed." The canary lifted its feet clear of the finger, floated for an instant, then beat its wings savagely for a second or two to set course and pick up speed, and bulleted away whence he had come, wings folded, feet streamlined under. "Jimmy's got something he wants to talk with you about," Grimes commenced. "Delighted," Waldo answered lazily. "But shan't we dine first? Have you an appetite, sir?" Waldo full, Stevens decided, might be easier to cope with than Waldo empty. Besides, his own midsection informed him that wrestling with a calorie or two might be pleasant. "Yes, I have." "Excellent." They were served. Stevens was never able to decide whether Waldo had prepared the meal by means of his many namesakes, or, oh, right, he has, like, uh, duplicate, robot duplicates of himself that he remote controls that are around in this space station as well. I forgot about that little detail. Stevens was never able to decide whether Waldo had prepared the meal by means of his many namesakes, or whether servants somewhere out of sight had done the actual work. Modern food preparation methods being what they were, Waldo could have done it alone. He, Stevens, batched it with no difficulty, and so did Gus. But he made a mental note to ask But he made a mental note to ask Doc Grimes at the first opportunity what resident staff, if any, Waldo employed. He never remembered to do so. The dinner arrived in a small food chest, propelled to their midst at the end of a long, telescoping pneumatic tube. It stopped with a soft sigh and held its position. Stevens paid little attention to the food itself. It was adequate and tasty, he knew, for his attention was held by the dishes and serving methods. Waldo let his own steak float in front of him, cut bites from it with curved surgical shears, and conveyed them to his mouth by means of dainty tongs. He made hard work of chewing. "You can't get good steaks anymore," he remarked. "This one is tough. God knows I pay enough, and complain enough." Stevens did not answer. He thought his own steak had been tenderized too much, and almost fell apart. He was managing it with knife and fork, but the knife was superfluous. It appeared that Waldo did not expect his guests to make use of his own admittedly superior methods and utensils. Stevens ate from a platter clamped to his thighs, making a lap for it after Grimes's example by squatting in midair. The platter itself had been thoughtfully provided with sharp little prongs on its service side. Liquids were served in small, flexible skins, equipped with nipples. Think of a baby's plastic nursing bottle. The food chest took the utensils away with a dolorous insufflation. "Will you smoke, sir?" "Thank you." He saw what a weight-free ashtray necessarily should be, a long tube with a bell-shaped receptacle on its end. A slight suction in the tube, and ashes knocked into the bell were swept away, out of sight and mind. Why are you burning things inside a tin can floating in space? Please don't do that. It makes me nervous. "About that matter," Grimes commenced again. "Jimmy here is chief engineer for North American Power Air." "What?" Waldo straightened himself, became rigid. His chest rose and fell. He ignored Stevens entirely. "Uncle Gus, do you mean to say that you have introduced an officer of that company into my home?" "Don't get your dander up. Relax. Damn it, I've warned you not to do anything to raise your blood pressure." Grimes propelled himself closer to his host and took him by the wrist in the age-old fashion of a physician counting pulse. "Breathe slower. What you trying to do? Go on an oxygen jag?" Waldo tried to shake himself loose. It was a rather pitiful gesture. The old man had 10 times his strength. "Uncle Gus, you—" "Shut up!" The three maintained a silence for several minutes, uncomfortable for at least 2 of them. Grimes did not seem to mind it. "There," he said at last. "That's better. Now keep your shirt on and listen to me. Jimmy is a nice kid, and he has never done anything to you. And he has behaved himself while he's been here. You've got no right to be rude to him, no matter who he works for. Matter of fact, you owe him an apology." "Aw, really now, Doc," Stevens protested. "I'm afraid I have been here somewhat under false colors. I'm sorry, Mr. Jones. I didn't intend it to be that way. I tried to explain when we arrived." Waldo's face was hard to read. He was evidently trying hard to control himself. "Not at all, Mr. Stevens. I am sorry that I showed temper. It is perfectly true that I should not transfer to you any animus I feel for your employers, though God knows I bear no love for them." I know it. Nevertheless, I am sorry to hear you say it. I was cheated. Do you understand? Cheated! By as rotten a piece of quasi-legal chicanery as has ever... Easy, Waldo. Sorry, Uncle Gus. He continued, his voice less shrill. You know of the so-called Hathaway patent? Yes, of course. So-called is putting it mildly. The man was a mere machinist. Those patents are mine. Waldo's version, as he proceeded to give it, was reasonably factual, Stevens felt, but quite biased and unreasonable. Perhaps Hathaway had been working, as Waldo alleged, simply as a servant, a hired artisan, but there was nothing to prove it, no contract, no papers of any sort. The man had filed certain patents, the only ones he had ever filed, and admittedly Waldo-ish in their cleverness. Hathaway had then promptly died, and his heirs, through their attorneys, had sold the patents to a firm which had been dickering with Hathaway. Waldo alleged that this firm had put Hathaway up to stealing from him, had caused him to hire himself out to Waldo for that purpose. But the firm was defunct. Its assets had been sold to North American Power Air. NAPA, N-A-P-A, North American Power Air, had offered a settlement. Waldo had chosen to sue. The suit went against him. Even if Waldo were right, Stevens could not see any means by which the directors of NAPA could, legally, grant him any relief. The officers of a corporation are trustees for other people's money. If the directors of NAPA should attempt to give away property which had been adjudicated as belonging to the corporation, any stockholder could enjoin them before the act or recover from them personally after the act. At least, so Stevens thought. But he was no lawyer, he admitted to himself. The important point was that he needed Waldo's services, whereas Waldo held a bitter grudge against the firm he worked for. He was forced to admit that it did not look as if Doc Grimes' presence was enough to turn the trick. All that happened before my time, he began, and naturally I know very little about it. I'm awfully sorry it happened. It's pretty uncomfortable for me, for right now I find myself in a position where I need your services very badly indeed. Waldo did not seem displeased with the idea. So, how does this come about? Stevens explained to him in some detail the trouble they had been having with the DeKalb receptors. Waldo listened attentively. When Stevens had concluded, he said, Yes, this is... yep. Yes, that is much the same story your Mr. Gleason had to tell. Of course, as a technical man, you have given a much more coherent picture than that money manipulator was capable of giving. But why do you come to me? I do not specialize in radiation engineering, nor do I have any degrees from fancy institutions. I come to you, Stevens said seriously, for the same reason everybody else comes to you when they are really stuck with an engineering problem. So far as I know, you have an unbroken record of solving any problem you cared to tackle. Your record reminds me of another man. Who? Waldo's tone was suddenly sharp. Edison. He did not bother with degrees either, but he solved all the hard problems of his day. I like how we're just going to casually ignore that, Edison did a lot less inventing of things himself than is generally attributed to him. I'm not saying that he was a thief. He probably was. But he definitely had think tanks coming up with stuff for him to patent. That's a matter of record. Oh, Edison. I thought you were speaking of a contemporary. No doubt he was all right in his day, he added with overt generosity. I was not comparing him to you. I was simply recalling that Edison was reputed to prefer hard problems to easy ones. I've heard the same about you. I had hopes that this problem might be hard enough to interest you. It is mildly interesting, Waldo conceded, sorry. A little out of my line, but interesting. I must say, however, that I am surprised to hear you, an executive of North American Power Air, express such a high opinion of my talents. One would think that, if the opinion were sincere, it would not have been difficult to convince your firm of my indisputable handiwork in the matter of the so-called Hathaway patents. Really, thought Stevens, the man is impossible. A mind like a weasel. Aloud, he said, I suppose the matter was handled by the business management and law staff. They would hardly be equipped to distinguish between routine engineering and inspired design. The answer seemed to mollify Waldo. He asked, What does your own research staff say about the problem? Stevens looked wry. Nothing helpful. Dr. Rambeau does not really seem to believe the data I bring him. He says it's impossible, but it makes him unhappy. I really believe that he has been living on aspirin and Nembutal for a good many weeks. Rambeau, Waldo said slowly. I recall the man. A mediocre mind, all memory and no intuition. I don't think I would feel discouraged simply because Rambeau is puzzled. You really feel that there is some hope? It should not be too difficult. I had already given the matter some thought after Mr. Gleason's phone call. You have given me additional data, and I think I can see at least 2 new lines of approach which may prove fruitful. In any case, there is always some approach. The correct one. Does that mean you will accept? Stevens demanded, nervous with relief. Accept? Waldo's eyebrows climbed up. My dear sir, what in the world are you talking about? We were simply indulging in a social conversation. I would not help your company under any circumstances whatsoever. I hope to see your firm destroyed utterly, bankrupt and ruined. This may well be the occasion. Stevens fought to keep control of himself. Tricked! The fat slob had simply been playing with him, leading him on. There was no decency in him. In careful tones he continued, I do not ask that you have any mercy on North American, Mr. Jones, but I appeal to your sense of duty. There is public interest involved. Millions of people are vitally dependent on the service we provide. Don't you see that the service must continue regardless of you or me? Waldo pursed his lips. No, he said, I'm afraid it does not affect me. The welfare of those nameless swarms of earth crawlers is, I fear, not my concern. I have done more for them already than there was ever any need to do. They hardly deserve help. Left to their own devices, most of them would sink back to caves and stone axes. Did you ever see a performing ape, Mr. Stevens, dressed in a man's clothes and cutting capers on roller skates? Let me leave you with this thought. I am not a roller skate mechanic for apes. If I stick around here much longer, Stevens advised himself, there will be hell to pay. Aloud, he said, I take it that is your last word? You may so take it. Good day, sir. I enjoyed your visit. Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks for the dinner. Not at all. As Stevens turned away and prepared to shove himself toward the exit, Grimes called after him, Jimmy, wait for me in the reception room. As soon as Stevens was out of earshot, Grimes turned to Waldo and looked him up and down. Waldo, he said slowly, I always did know that you were one of the meanest, orneriest men alive, but your compliments don't faze me, Uncle Gus. Shut up and listen to me. As I was saying, I knew you were too rotten selfish to live with, but this is the first time I ever knew you to be a four-flusher to boot. What is a four-flusher? F-O-U-R flusher. That might be a card term? What do you mean by that? You know what? I'm going to look up what a four-flusher is. What is a four-flusher? A 1919 film. Doesn't really help me very much. Okay, I know what a four-flush is. Here we go. A person who makes false or pretentious claims. A bluffer. That makes sense.
A four flush, also a flush draw, is a poker draw or non-standard poker hand that is one card short of being a full flush. Four flushing refers to empty boasting or unsuccessful bluffing, and a four flusher is a person who makes empty boasts or bluffs when holding a four flush.
Okay, so as someone who doesn't gamble, this has been an informative day. I'm not saying that everybody who plays cards is a gambler. That came out wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Some people do recreational poker, okay? I know this. Just because I don't. Anyway. Wer für you? Ah, yes, wer fever. Sehr fever. Waldo, he said slowly, I always did know that you were one of the meanest, orneriest men alive, but your compliments don't faze me, Uncle Gus. Shut up and listen to me. As I was saying, I knew you were too rotten selfish to live with, but this is the first time I ever knew you to be a four-flusher to boot. What do you mean by that? Explain yourself. Shucks, you haven't any more idea of how to crack the problem that boy's up against than I have. You traded on your reputation as a miracle man just to make him unhappy. Why, you cheap tin-horn bluffer, if you... Stop it! Go ahead, Grimes said quietly. Run up your blood pressure. I won't interfere with you. The sooner you blow a gasket, the better. Waldo calmed down. Uncle Gus, what makes you think I was bluffing? Because I know you. If you had felt able to deliver the goods, you would have looked the situation over and worked out a plan to get Napa by the short hair through having something they had to have. That way you would have proved your revenge. Waldo shook his head. You underestimate the intensity of my feeling in the matter. I do like hell. I hadn't finished. About that sweet little talk you gave him concerning your responsibility to the race. You've got a head on you. You know damned well, and so do I, that of all people you can least afford to have anything serious happen to the setup down on Earth. That means you don't see any way to prevent it. Why, what do you mean? I have no interest in such troubles. I'm independent of such things. You know me better than that. Independent, eh? Who mined the steel in these walls? Who raised that steer you dined on tonight? You're as independent as a queen bee, and about as helpless. Waldo looked startled. He recovered himself and answered, Oh, no, Uncle Gus, I really am independent. Why, I have supplies here for years. How many years? Why, 5 about. And then what? You may live another 50, if you have regular supply service. How do you prefer to die? Starvation or thirst? Water is no problem, Waldo said thoughtfully. As for supplies, I suppose I could use hydroponics a little more and stock up with some meat animals. Grimes cut him short with a nasty laugh. Prove my point. You don't know how to avert it, so you are figuring some way to save your own skin. I know you. You wouldn't talk about starting a truck garden if you knew the answers. Waldo looked at him thoughtfully. That's not entirely true. I don't know the solution, but I do have some ideas about it. I'll bet you a half interest in hell that I can crack it. Now that you have called my attention to it, I must admit I'm rather tied in with the economic system down below, and, he smiled faintly, I was never one to neglect my own interests. Just a moment. I'll call your friend. Not so fast. I came along for another reason besides introducing Jimmy to you. It can't be just any solution. It's got to be a particular solution. What do you mean? It's got to be a solution that will do away with the need for filling up the air with radiant energy. Oh, that. See here, Uncle Gus, I know how interested you are in your theory. Yes, it does say interested, not invested. I know how interested you are with your theory, and I've never disputed the possibility that you may be right. But you can't expect me to mix that into another and very difficult problem. Take another look. You're in this for self-interest. Suppose everybody was in the shape you were in. You mean my physical condition? I mean just that. I know you don't like to talk about it, but we blamed well need to. If everybody was as weak as you are, presto, no coffee and cakes for Waldo. And that's just what I see coming. You're the only man I know of who can appreciate what it means. It seems fantastic. It is, but the signs are there for anybody to read who wants to. Epidemic myasthenia, not necessarily acute, but enough to raise hell with our mechanical civilization, enough to play hob with your supply lines. I've been collating my data since I saw you last and drawing some curves. You should see 'em. Did you bring them? No, but I'll send 'em up. In the meantime, you can take my word for it. He waited. Well, how about it? I'll accept it as a tentative working hypothesis, Waldo said slowly, until I see your figures. I shall probably want you to conduct some further research for me on the ground, if your data is what you say it is. Fair enough. Goodbye. Grimes kicked the air a couple of times as he absent-mindedly tried to walk. Stephen's frame of mind as he waited for Grimes is better left undescribed. The mildest thought that passed through his mind was a plaintive one about the things a man had to put up with to hold down what seemed like a simple job of engineering. Well, he wouldn't have the job very long. But he decided not to resign. He'd wait until they fired him. He wouldn't run out. But he would damn well get that vacation before he looked for another job. He spent several minutes wishing that Waldo were strong enough for him to be able to take a poke at him. Or kick him in the belly. That would be more fun. He was startled when the dummy suddenly came to life and called him by name. "Oh, Mr. Stevens." "Huh? Yes?" "I have decided to accept the commission. My attorneys will arrange the details with your business office." He was too surprised to answer for a couple of seconds. When he did so, the dummy had already gone dead. He waited impatiently for Grimes to show up. "Doc," he said, when the old man swam into view, "what got into him? How did you do it?" "What got into him? How did you do it?" "He thought it over and reconsidered," Grimes said succinctly. "Let's get going." Stevens dropped Dr. Augustus Grimes at the doctor's home, then proceeded to his office. He had no more than parked his car and entered the tunnel leading toward the zone plant when he ran into his assistant. McLeod seemed a little out of breath. "Gee, Chief," he said, "I hope that was you. I'd have had him watching for you." Wait, no, that's not it. "I've had him watching for you. I need to see you." "What's busted now?" Stevens demanded apprehensively. "One of the cities?" "No. What made you think so?" "Go ahead with your story."
So far as I know, ground power is humming sweet as can be. No trouble with the cities. What I had on me mind was this. I fixed my heap.
Huh? You mean you fixed the ship you crashed in?
It wasn't exactly a crash. I had plenty of power in the reserve banks. When the reception cut off, I switched to emergency and landed her.
But you fixed it? Was it the DeKalbs or something else?
It was the DeKalbs, all right, and they're fixed. But I didn't exactly do it myself. I got it done. You see,
What was the matter with them?
I don't know exactly. You see, I decided that there was no point in hiring another sky car and maybe having another forced landing on the way home. Besides, it was my own crate, and I was flying, and I didn't want to dismantle her just to get the DeKalbs out and have her spread all over the countryside. So I hired a crawler with the idea of taking her back all in one piece. So I struck a deal with a guy who had a 12-ton semi-tractor combination, and we...
For crimini's sake, make it march. What happened?
I'm trying to tell you. We pushed on into Pennsylvania, and we were making pretty fair time when the crawler broke down. The right lead wheel ahead of the treads. Honest to goodness, Jim, those roads are something fierce.
Never mind all that. Why waste taxes on roads when 90% of the traffic is in the air? You messed up a wheel. So then what?
Just the same, those roads are a disgrace, McLeod maintained stubbornly. Hey.
Nothing is ever perfect, is it? Anyway.
Just the same, those roads are a disgrace, McLeod maintained stubbornly. I was brought up in that part of the country. When I was a kid, the road we were on was 6 lanes wide and smooth as a baby's fanny. They ought to be kept up. We might need 'em some day. Seeing the look in his senior's eye, he went on hastily. The driver mugged in with his home office, and they promised to send a repair car out from the next town. All told, it would take 3-4 hours, maybe more. Well, we were laid up in the county I grew up in. I says to myself, McLeod, this is a wonderful chance to return to the scenes of your childhood and the room where the sun came peeping in the morn. Figuratively speaking, of course. Matter of fact, our house didn't have any windows.
I don't care if you were raised in a barrel.
Temper, temper, McLeod said imperturbably. Yes, I said that correctly. Excellent, excellent. I was worried about that. Imperturbably. I'm telling you this so you'll understand what happened, but you aren't gonna like it.
I don't like it now.
You'll like it less. I climbed down out of the cab and took a look around. We were about 5 miles from my hometown, too far for me to want to walk it. But I thought I recognised a clump of trees on the brow of a little rise, maybe a quarter of a mile down off the road. So I walked over to see. I was right. Just over the rise was the cabin where Gramps Schneider used to live.
Gramps Snyder?
Not Snyder, Schneider. Oh boy, we kids used to be friendly with. 90 years older than anybody. I figured he was dead, but it wouldn't hurt any to walk down and see. He wasn't. Hello, Gramps, I said.
Come in, Hugh Donald, he said. Wipe the feet on the mat.
I came and sat down. He was busy. He was fussing with something simmering in a stew pan on his base burner. I asked him what it was.
For morning aches,
he said. Gramps isn't exactly a hex doctor.
Huh?
I mean, he doesn't make a living by it. He raises a few chickens and a garden truck, and some of the plain people, house Amish mostly, give him pies and things. But he knows a lot about herbs and such. Presently, he stopped and cut me a slice of shoe-fly pie. I told him, danke. He said,
You've been growing up, Hugh Donald,
and asked me how I was doing in school. I told him I was doing pretty well. He looked at me again and said,
But you have trouble fretting, Hugh.
It wasn't a question, it was a statement. When I finished the pie, I found myself trying to tell him what kind of troubles I had. It wasn't easy. I don't suppose Gramps has ever been off the ground in his life. A modern radiation theory isn't something you can explain in words of one syllable. I was getting more and more tangled up when he stood up, put on his hat, and said,
If you see this car you speak about.
We walked over to the highway. The repair gang had arrived, but the crawler wasn't ready yet. I helped Gramps up into the platform, and we got into my bus. I showed him the decalbs and tried to explain what they did, or rather what they were supposed to do. Mind you, I was just killing time. He pointed to the sheaf of antennae and asked,
These fingers, they reach out for the power.
It was as good an explanation as any, so I'll let it ride. He said,
I understand.
and pulled a piece of chalk out of his trousers and began drawing lines on each antenna from front to back. I walked up front to see how the repair crew were doing. After a bit, Gramps joined me.
You, Donald, he says, the fingers, now they will make.
I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I thanked him plenty. The crawler was ready to go. We said goodbye, and he walked back toward his shack. I went back to my car and took a look in, just in case. I didn't think it could hurt anything, but I wanted to be sure. Just for the ducks of it, I tried out the receptors. They worked.
What? Put in Stevens. You don't mean to stand there and tell me an old witch doctor fixed your decalbs?
Not witch doctor, hex doctor, but you get the idea.
Stevens shook his head. It's simply a coincidence. Something they came back to. Sometimes they come back into order as spontaneously as they go out.
That's what you think. Not this one. I've just been preparing you for the shock you're going to get. Come and take a look.
What do you mean? Where?
In the inner hangar. In the inner hangar.
While they walked out to where McLeod had left his broomstick, he continued,
I wrote out a credit for the crawler pilot and flew back. I haven't spoken to anyone else about it. I've been biting my nails down to my elbows waiting for you to show up.
The sky car seemed quite ordinary. Stevens examined the decalbs and saw some faint chalk marks on their metal sides. Nothing else unusual.
Watch while I cut in reception, McLeod told him.
Stevens waited, heard the faint hum as the circuits became activized, and looked. The antennae of the decalbs, each a rigid pencil of metal, were bending, flexing, writhing like a cluster of worms. They were reaching out like fingers. Stevens remained squatting down by the decalbs, watching their outrageous motion. McLeod left the control saddle, came back, and joined him.
Well, Chief, he demanded, tell me about it. What do you make of it?
Got a cigarette?
What are those things sticking out of your pocket?
Oh, yeah, sure.
What are those things sticking out of your pocket?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Stevens took one out, lighted it, and burned it halfway down, unevenly, with 2 long drags. Go on, McLeod urged. Give us a tell. What makes it do that?
Well, Stevens said slowly, I can think of 3 things to do next.
Yeah?
The first is to fire Dr. Rambeau and give his job to Gramps Schneider.
That's a good idea in any case.
The second is to just wait here quietly until the boys with the straitjackets show up to take us home.
And what's the third?
The third, Stevens said savagely, is to take this damned heap out and sink it in the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean and pretend like it never happened. A mechanic stuck his head in the door of the car. Dr. Stevens? Get out of here! The head hastily withdrew. The voice picked up in aggrieved tones. Message from the head office? Stevens got up, went to the operator's saddle, cleared the board, and assured himself that the antennae had ceased their disturbing movements. They had. In fact, they appeared so beautifully straight and rigid that he was again tempted to doubt the correctness of his own senses. He climbed out to the floor of the hangar, McLeod behind him. Sorry to have blasted at you, Whitey, he said to the workman in placating tones. What's the message? Mr. Gleason would like for you to come into his office as soon as you can. I will at once. And, Whitey, I have a job for you. Yeah? This heap here. Seal up its doors and don't let anybody monkey with it. Then have it dragged, mind you. Don't try to start it. Have it dragged over into the main lab. Okay. Stevens started away. McLeod stopped him.
What do I go home in?
Oh, yes, it's your personal property, isn't it? Tell you what, Mac, the company needs it. Make out a purchase order and I'll sign it.
Well, no, I don't rightly know as I want to sell it. It might be the only job in the country, working properly before long. Ah, don't be silly. If the others play out, it won't do you any good to have the only one in working order. Power will be shut down. I suppose there's that, McLeod conceded. Still, he said, brightening visibly, a crate like that, with its special talents, ought to be worth a good deal more than list. You couldn't just go out and buy one. Mac, said Stevens, you've got avarice in your heart and thievery in your fingertips. How much do you want for it? Suppose we say twice the list price. No, that's letting you get off easy. I happen to know you bought that job at a discount. But go ahead. Either the company can stand it, or it won't make much difference in the bankruptcy. Oh, good. More voices I can't remember. Gleason looked up as Stevens came in. There you are, Jim. You seem to have pulled a miracle with our friend Waldo the Great. Nice work. How much did he stick us for? Just his usual contract. Of course, his usual contract is a bit like robbery with violence, but it will be worth it if he is successful. And it's on a straight contingent basis. He must feel pretty sure of himself. They say he's never lost a contingent fee in his life. Tell me, what is he like? Did you really get into his house? I did, and I'll tell you all about it sometime. Right now, another matter has come up which has me talking to myself. You ought to hear about it at once. So, go ahead. Stevens opened his mouth, closed it again, and realized that it had to be seen to be believed. Say, could you come down with me to the main lab? I've got something to show you. Certainly. Gleason was not as perturbed by the squirming metal rods as Stevens had been. He was surprised, but not upset. The truth of the matter is that he lacked the necessary technical background to receive the full emotional impact of the inescapable implications of the phenomenon. That's pretty unusual, isn't it? He said quietly. Unusual? Look, Chief, if the sun rose in the west, what would you think? I would think I would call the observatory and ask them why. Well, all I can say is that I would a whole lot rather that the sun rose in the west than to have this happen. I admit it is pretty disconcerting, Gleason agreed. I can't say that I've ever seen anything like it. What is Dr. Rambeau's opinion? He hasn't seen it. Then perhaps we had better send for him. He may not have gone home for the night as yet. Why not show it to Waldo instead? We will, but Dr. Rambeau's entitled to see it first. After all, it's his bailiwick, and I'm afraid the poor fellow's nose is pretty well out of joint as it is. I don't want to go over his head. Stevens felt a sudden flood of intuition. Just a second, Chief. You're right, but if it's all the same to you, I would rather that you showed it to him than for me to do it. Why so, Jimmy? You can explain it to him. I can't explain a damn thing to him that I haven't already told you, and for the next few hours I'm going to be very, very busy indeed. Gleason looked him over, shrugged his shoulders, and said mildly, Very well, Jim, if you prefer it that way. Waldo was quite busy, and therefore happy. He would never have admitted, he did not admit even to himself, that there were certain drawbacks to his self-imposed withdrawal from the world, and that chief among these was boredom. He had never had much opportunity to enjoy the time-consuming delights of social intercourse. He honestly believed that the smooth apes had nothing to offer him in the way of companionship. Nevertheless, the pleasure of the solitary intellectual life can pall. He repeatedly urged Uncle Gus to make his permanent home in Freehold, but he told himself that it was a desire to take care of the old man. Which motivated him. True, he enjoyed arguing with Grimes, but he was not aware how much those arguments meant to him. The truth of the matter was that Grimes was the only one of the human race who treated him entirely as another human and an equal, and Waldo wallowed in it, completely unconscious that the pleasure he felt in the old man's company was the commonest and most precious of all human pleasures. But at present he was happy in the only way he knew how to be happy, working. There were two problems, that of Stevens and that of Grimes. Required a single solution which would satisfy each of them. There were three stages to each problem. First, to satisfy himself that the problems really did exist, that the situations were in fact as they had been reported to him verbally. Second, to undertake such research as the preliminary data suggested. And third, when he felt that his data was complete, to invent a solution. Invent, not find. Dr. Rambeau might have said find or search for. To Rambeau, the universe was an inexorably ordered cosmos, ruled by unvarying law. To Waldo, the universe was the enemy, which he strove to force to submit to his will. They might have been speaking of the same thing, but their approaches were different. There was much to be done. Stevens had supplied him with a mass of data, both on the theoretical nature of the radiated power system and the DeKalb receptors which were the keystone of the system, and also on the various cases of erratic performance of which they had lately been guilty. Waldo had not given serious attention to power radiation up to this time, simply because he had not needed to. He found it interesting but comparatively simple. Several improvements suggested themselves to his mind. That standing wave, for example, which was the main factor in the coaxial beam. The efficiency of reception could be increased considerably by sending a message back over it which would automatically correct the aiming of the beam. Power delivery to moving vehicles could be made nearly as efficient as the power reception to stationary receivers. Not that such an idea was important at present. Later, when he had solved the problem at hand, he intended to make Napa pay through the nose for the idea. Or perhaps it would be more amusing to compete with them. He wondered when their basic patents ran out. Must look that up. Despite inefficiencies, the DeKalb receptors should work every time, all the time, without failure. He went happily about finding out why they did not. He had suspected some obvious to him, defect in manufacture. But the inoperative DeKalbs which Stevens had delivered to him refused to give up their secret. He x-rayed them, measured them with micrometer and interferometer, subjected them to all the usual tests and some that were quite unusual and peculiarly Waldo-ish. They would not perform. He built a DeKalb in his shop, using one of the inoperative ones as a model and using the reworked metal of another of the same design, also inoperative, as the raw material. He used his finest scanners to see with, and his smallest Waldos, tiny pixie hands an inch across, for manipulation in the final stages. He created a DeKalb which was as nearly identical with its model as technology and incredible skill could produce. It worked beautifully. Its elder twin refused to work. He was not discouraged by this. On the contrary, he was elated. He had proved with certainty, that the failure of the DeKalbs was not a failure of workmanship, but a basic failure in theory. The problem was real. Stevens had reported to him the scandalous performance of the DeKalbs in McLeod's Sky Car, but he had not yet given his attention to the matter. Presently, in proper order, when he got around to it, he would look into the matter. In the meantime, he tabled the matter. The smooth apes were an hysterical lot. There was probably nothing to the story. Writhing like Medusa's locks, indeed. He gave fully half his time to Grimes' problem. He was forced to admit that the biological sciences, if you could call them science, were more fascinating than he had thought. He had shunned them, more or less. The failure of expensive experts to do anything for his condition when he was a child had made him contemptuous of such studies. Old wives' nostrums dressed up in fancy terminology. Grimes he liked and even respected, but Grimes was a special case. Grimes's data had convinced Waldo that the old man had a case. Why, this was serious. The figures were incomplete, but nevertheless convincing. The curve of the third decrement, extrapolated not too unreasonably, indicated that in 20 years there would not be a man left with strength enough to work in heavy industries. Button pushing would be all they would be good for. It did not occur to him that all he was good for was button pushing. He regarded weakness in the smooth apes as an old-style farmer might regard weakness in a draft animal. The farmer did not expect to pull the plow. That was the horse's job. Grimes's medical colleagues must be utter fools. Nevertheless, he sent for the best physiologists, neurologists, brain surgeons, and anatomists he could locate, ordering them as one might order goods from a catalogue. He must understand this matter. He was considerably annoyed when he found that he could not make arrangements, by any means, to perform vivisection on human beings. He was convinced by this time that the damage done by ultra-shortwave radiation was damage to the neurological system, and that the whole matter should be treated from the standpoint of electromagnetic theory. He wanted to perform certain delicate manipulations in which human beings would be hooked up directly to apparatus of his own design, to find out in what manner nerve impulses differed from electrical current. He felt that if he could disconnect portions of a man's nervous circuit, replace it in part with electrical hookups, and examine the whole matter in situ, he might make illuminating discoveries. True, the man might not be much use to himself afterward. But the authorities were stuffy about it. He was forced to content himself with cadavers and with animals. Nevertheless, he made progress. Extreme shortwave radiation had a definite effect on the nervous system. A double effect. It produced ghost pulsations in the neurons, insufficient to accomplish muscular motor response, but, he suspected, strong enough to keep the body in a continual state of inhibited nervous excitation. And, secondly, a living specimen which had been subjected to this process for any length of time showed a definite, small but measurable, lowering in the efficiency of its neural impulses. If it had been an electrical circuit, he would have described the second effect as a decrease in insulating efficiency. The sum of these two effects on the subject individual was a condition of mild tiredness, somewhat similar to the malaise of the early stages of pulmonary tuberculosis. The victim did not feel sick, he simply lacked pep. Strenuous bodily activity was not impossible, it was simply distasteful. It required too much effort, too much willpower. But an orthodox pathologist would have been forced to report that the victim was in perfect health. A little run down, perhaps, but nothing wrong with him. Too sedentary a life, probably. What he needed was fresh air, sunshine, and healthy exercise. Doc Grimes alone had guessed that the present general marked preference for a sedentary life was the effect and not the cause of the prevailing lack of vigor. The change had been slow, at least as slow as the increase in radiation in the air. The individuals concerned had noticed it, if at all, simply as an indication that they were growing a little bit older, slowing down, not so young as I used to be. And they were content to slow down. It was more comfortable than exertion. Grimes had first begun to be concerned about it when he began to notice that all of his younger patients were the bookish type. It was all very well for a kid to like to read books, he felt, but a normal boy ought to be out doing a little hell-raising, too. What had become of the sandlot football games, the games of scrub, the clothes-tearing activity that had characterized his own boyhood? Damn it, a kid ought not to spend all his time poring over a stamp collection. Waldo was beginning to find the answer. The nerve network of the body was not dissimilar to antennae. Like antennae, it could and did pick up electromagnetic waves, but the pickup was evidenced. Toot yourself. But the pickup was evidenced not as induced electrical current, but as nerve pulsation, impulses which were maddeningly similar to, but distinctly different from, electrical current. Electromotive force could be used in place of nerve impulses to activate muscle tissue, but EMF was not nerve impulse. For one thing, they traveled at vastly different rates of speed. Electrical current travels at a speed approaching that of light. Neural impulse is measured in feet per second. Waldo felt that somewhere in this matter of speed lay the key to the problem. He was not permitted to ignore the matter of McCloud's fantastic sky car as long as he had intended to. Dr. Rambeau called him up. Waldo accepted the call since it was routed from the laboratories of Napa. "Who and what do you want?" he demanded of the image. Rambeau looked around cautiously. "Shh! Not so loud," he whispered. "They might be listening." Who might be? And who are you?" "They are the ones who are doing it. Lock your doors at night. I'm Dr. Rambeau." "Dr. Rambeau? Oh, yes. Well, Doctor, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" The doctor leaned forward until he appeared about to fall out of the stereo picture. "I've learned how to do it," he said tensely. "How to do what?" "Make the DeKalbs work. The dear DeKalbs." He suddenly thrust his hands at Waldo while clutching frantically with his fingers. "They go like this. Wiggle, 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 wiggle." Waldo felt a normal impulse to cut the man off, but it was overruled by a fascination as to what he would say next. Rambeau continued. "Do you know why? Do you? Riddle me that." "Why?" Rambeau placed a finger beside his nose and smiled roguishly. "Wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't you give a pretty to know? But I'll tell you." "Tell me, then." Rambeau suddenly looked terrified. "Perhaps I shouldn't. Perhaps they are listening. But I will. Listen carefully. Nothing is certain." "Is that all?" inquired Waldo, now definitely amused by the man's antics. "Is that all? Isn't that enough? Hens will crow and cocks will lay. You are here and I am there, or maybe not. Nothing is certain. Nothing is certain. Around and around the little ball goes, and where it stops, nobody knows. Only I've learned how to do it." "How to do what?" "How to make the little ball stop where I want it to. Look." He whipped out a penknife. "When you cut yourself, you bleed, don't you? Or do you?" He sliced at the forefinger of his left hand. "See?" He held the finger close to the pickup. The cut, though deep, was barely discernible, and it was bleeding not at all. Capital, thought Waldo. Hysteric vascular control. A perfect clinical case. "Anybody can do that," he said aloud. "Show me a hard one." "Anybody? Certainly anybody can, if they know how. Try this one." He jabbed the point of the penknife straight into the palm of his left hand, so that it stuck out the back of his hand. He wiggled the blade in the wound, withdrew it, and displayed the palm. No blood, and the incision was closing rapidly. "Do you know why? The knife is only probably there, and I found the improbability." Amusing as it had been, Waldo was beginning to be bored by it. "Is that all?" "There is no end to it," pronounced Rambeau, "for nothing is certain anymore. Watch this." He held the knife flat on his palm and turned his hand over. The knife did not fall, but remained in contact with the underside of his hand. Waldo was suddenly attentive. It might be a trick, it probably was a trick, but it impressed him more, much more, than Rambeau's failure to bleed when cut. One was common to certain types of psychosis. The other should not have happened, unless he had some superglue. Or, I don't know, duct tape. And a little bit of misdirection. I don't know, just maybe. He cut in another viewphone circuit. "Get me Chief Engineer Stevens at North American Power Air," he said sharply. "At once." Rambeau paid no attention, but continued to speak of the penknife. "It does not know which way is down.
he crooned, for nothing is certain anymore. Maybe it will fall, maybe not. I think it will. There, it has. Would you like to see me walk on the ceiling? You called me, Mr. Jones? It was Stevens. Waldo cut his audio circuit to Rambeau. Yes, that jumping jack, Rambeau. Catch him and bring him to me at once. I want to see him. But, Mr. Move! He cut Stevens off and renewed the audio to Rambeau. Uncertainty. Chaos is king and magic is loose in the world. Rambeau looked vaguely at Waldo, brightened, and added, Good day, Mr. Jones. Thank you for calling. The screen went dead. Waldo waited impatiently. The whole thing had been a hoax, he told himself. Rambeau had played a gigantic practical joke. Waldo disliked practical jokes. He put in another call for Stevens and left it in. When Stevens did call back, his hair was mussed and his face was red. We had a bad time of it, he said. Did you get him? Rambeau? Yes, finally. Then bring him up. To Freehold? That's impossible. You don't understand. He's blown his top. He's crazy. They've taken him away to a hospital. You assume too much, Waldo said icily. I know he's crazy, but I meant what I said. Arrange it. Provide nurses. Sign affidavits. Use bribery. Bring him to me at once. It is necessary. You really mean that? I am not in the habit of jesting. Something to do with your investigations? He's in no shape to be useful to you. I can tell you that. That, pronounced Waldo, is for me to decide. Well, said Stevens doubtfully, I'll try. See that you succeed. Stevens called back 30 minutes later. I can't bring Rambeau. You clumsy incompetent. Stevens turned red, but held his temper. Never mind the personalities. He's gone. He never got to the hospital. What? That's the crazy part about it. They took him away in a confining stretcher, laced up like a corset. I saw them fasten him in myself. But when they got there, he was gone. And the attendants claimed the straps weren't even unbuckled. Waldo started to say, preposterous, thought better of it. Thought better of it. There's a period there. Sorry. Waldo started to say, preposterous, thought better of it. Stevens went on. But that's not the half of it. I'd sure like to talk to him myself. I've been looking around his lab. You know that set of decalibs that went nuts? The ones that were hexed? I know to what you refer. Rambeau's got a second set to doing the same thing. Waldo remained silent for several seconds, then said quietly, Dr. Stevens. Yes? I want to thank you for your efforts, and will you please have both sets of receptors, the two sets that are misbehaving, sent to Freehold at once? There was no doubt about it. Once he had seen them with his own eyes, watched the inexplicable squirming of the antennae, applied such tests as suggested themselves to his mind, Waldo was forced to conclude that he was faced with new phenomena for which he did not know the rules. If there were rules. For he was honest with himself. If he saw what he thought he saw, then rules were being broken by the new phenomena, rules which he had considered valid, rules to which he had never previously encountered exceptions. He admitted to himself that the original failures of the decalibs should have been considered just as overwhelmingly upsetting to physical law as the unique behavior of these two. The difference lay in that one alien phenomenon was spectacular, the other was not. Quite evidently, Dr. Rambeau had found it so. He had been informed that the doctor had been increasingly neurotic from the first instance of erratic performance of the decalib receptors. He regretted the loss of Dr. Rambeau.
Waldo was more impressed by Rambo crazy than he had ever been by Rambo sane. Apparently, the man had some modicum of ability after all. He had found out something. More, Waldo admitted, than he himself had been able to find out so far, even though it had driven Rambo insane. Waldo had no fear that Rambo's experience, whatever it had been, could unhinge his own reason. His own self-confidence was, perhaps, fully justified. His own mild paranoid tendency was just sufficient to give him defenses against an unfriendly world. For him, it was healthy, a necessary adjustment to an otherwise intolerable situation, no more pathological than a callus or an acquired immunity. Otherwise, he was probably more able to face disturbing facts with equanimity. Wow. Equanimity? Otherwise, he was probably more able to face disturbing facts with equanimity than 99% of his contemporaries. He had been born to disaster. He had met it and had overcome it, time and again. The very house which surrounded him was testimony to the calm and fearless fashion in which he had defeated a world to which he was not adapted. He exhausted, temporarily, the obvious lines of direct research concerning the strangely twisting metal rods. Rambo was not available for questioning. Very well, there remained one other man who knew more about it than Waldo did. He would seek him out. He called Stevens again.
Has there been any word of Dr. Rambo?
No word and no sign. I'm beginning to think the poor old fellow is dead.
Perhaps. The witch doctor friend of your assistant, was Schneider his name?
Gramps Schneider.
Yes, indeed. Will you please arrange for him to speak with me?
By phone, or do you want to see him in person?
I would prefer him to come here, but I understand that he is old and feeble. It may not be feasible for him to leave the ground. If he is knotted up with space sickness, he will be no use to me.
I'll see what can be done.
Very good. Please expedite the matter. And, Dr. Stevens,
Well,
if it should prove necessary to use the phone, arrange to have a portable full stereo taken to his home. I want the circumstances to be as favorable as possible.
okay. Imagine that, Stevens added to McLeod when the circuit had been broken. The great I Ams showing consideration for somebody else's convenience.
The fat boy must be sick,
McLeod decided. Seems likely. This chore is more yours than mine, Mac. Come along with me. We'll take a run over into Pennsylvania.
How about the plant?
Tell Carruthers he's it. If anything blows, we couldn't help it anyway. Stevens mugged back later in the day. Mr. Jones.
Yes, Doctor.
What you suggest can't be arranged.
You mean that Schneider can't come to Freehold?
I mean that, and I mean that you can't talk to him on the view phone.
I presume that you mean that he is dead.
No, I do not. I mean that he will not talk over the view phone under any circumstances whatsoever, to you or to anyone. He says that he is sorry not to accommodate you, but that he is opposed to everything of that nature. Cameras, cinecams, television, and so forth. He considers them dangerous. I am afraid he is set in his superstition.
As an ambassador, Dr. Stevens, you leave much to be desired.
Stevens counted up to 10, then said, I assure you that I have done everything in my power to comply with your wishes. If you are dissatisfied with the quality of my cooperation, I suggest that you speak to Mr. Gleason. He cleared the circuit.
How'd you like to kick him in the teeth?
McLeod said dreamily. Mac, you're a mind reader. Waldo tried again through his own agents, received the same answer. The situation was, to him, almost intolerable. It had been years since he had encountered a man whom he could not buy, bully, nor, in extremity, persuade. Nor, in extremity, persuade. I don't know what's going on with my diction, my embouchure. It's Mondays. I don't know what it is about the day before that makes my lips weird, but it is. I'm not, like, playing brass instruments all day, which I could definitely see doing it. I do think I have a tendency towards dehydration, though, when I'm distracted doing other things. Let's see. The situation was, to him, almost intolerable. It had been years since he had encountered a man whom he could not buy, bully, nor, in extremity, persuade. Buying had failed. He had realized instinctively that Schneider would be unlikely to be motivated by greed. And how can one bully or wheedle a man who cannot be seen to be talked with? It was a dead end. No way out. Forget it. Except, of course, for a means best classed as a fate worse than death. No. No, not that. Don't think about it. Better to drop the whole matter, admit that it had him licked, and tell Gleason so. It had been 17 years since he had been at Earth's surface. Nothing could induce him to subject his body to the intolerable demands of that terrible field. Nothing. It might even kill him. He might choke to death, suffocate. No. He sailed gracefully across his shop, an over-padded Cupid. Give up this freedom, even for a time, for that torturous bondage? Ridiculous. It was not worth it. Better to ask an acrophobe to climb Half Dome, or demand that a claustrophobe interview a man in the world's deepest mine.
The world's deepest mine.
Blech.
Uncle Gus,
Ah, hello, Waldo. Glad you called.
would it be safe for me to come down to Earth?
Eh? How's that? Speak up, man. I didn't understand you.
I said, would it hurt me to take a trip down to Earth?
This hookup, said Grimes, is terrible. Sounded just like you were saying you wanted to come down to Earth.
That's what I did say.
What's the matter, Waldo? Do you feel all right?
I feel fine, but I have to see a man at Earth's surface. There isn't any other way for me to talk to him, and I've got to talk to him. Would the trip do me any harm?
Ought not to, if you're careful. After all, you were born there. Be careful of yourself, though. You've laid a lot of fat around your heart.
Oh dear, do you think it's dangerous?
No, you're sound enough. Just don't overstrain yourself, and be careful to keep your temper.
I will. I most certainly will. Uncle Gus,
Yes?
will you come along with me and help me see it through?
Oh, I don't think that's necessary.
Please, Uncle Gus, I don't trust anybody else.
Time you grew up, Waldo. However, I will, this once.
Now remember, Waldo told the pilot, the absolute acceleration must never exceed 1 1/10 Gs, even in landing. I'll be watching the accelerograph the whole time.
I've been driving ambulances, said the pilot, for 12 years, and I've never given a patient a rough ride yet.
That's no answer. Understand me? 1 1/10, and it should not even approach that figure until we are under the stratosphere.
Quiet, Balder! Quit snuffling!
I get you. Be sure that you do. Your bonuses depend on it.
Maybe you'd like to herd it yourself.
I don't like your attitude, my man. If I should die in the tank, you would never get another job.
The pilot muttered something. What was that? Waldo demanded sharply. Well, I said it might be worth it. Waldo started to turn red, opened his mouth. Grimes cut in. Easy, Waldo. Remember your heart.
Yes, Uncle Gus.
Grimes snaked his way forward, indicated to the pilot that he wanted to join him there. Wanted him to join him there.
Don't pay any attention to anything he says, he advised the man quietly, except what he said about acceleration. He really can't stand much acceleration. He might die in the tank.
Still don't think it would be any loss, but I'll be careful.
Good.
I'm ready to enter the tank, Waldo called out. Will you help me with the straps, Uncle Gus?
The tank was not a standard deceleration type, but a modification built for this one trip. The tank was roughly the shape of an oversized coffin and was swung in gimbals to keep it always normal to the axis of absolute acceleration. That was a long sentence. A longer sentence than I expected. The tank was roughly the shape of an oversized coffin and was swung in gimbals to keep it always normal to the axis of absolute acceleration. Waldo floated in water. The specific gravity of his fat hulk was low, from which he was separated by the usual flexible, gasketed tarpaulin. Supporting his head and shoulders was a pad shaped to his contour. A mechanical artificial resuscitator was built into the tank, the back pads being underwater, the breast pads out of the water, but retracted out of the way. Grimes stood by with neo-adrenaline. A saddle had been provided for him on the left side of the tank. Baldur was strapped to a shelf on the right side of the tank. He acted as a counterweight to Grimes. Grimes assured himself that all was in readiness, then called out to the pilot,
Start when you're ready.
Okay. He sealed the access port. The entry tube folded itself back against the threshold flat of freehold, freeing the ship. Gently, they got under way. Waldo closed his eyes. A look of seraphic suffering came over his face.
Uncle Gus, suppose the decalbs fail.
No matter. Ambulances store 6 times the normal reserve.
You're sure?
When Baldur began to feel weight, he started to whimper. Grimes spoke to him. He quieted down. But presently, days later, it seemed to Waldo, as the ship sank farther down into the Earth's gravitational field, the absolute acceleration necessarily increased, although the speed of the ship had not changed materially. The dog felt the weary heaviness creeping over his body. He did not understand it, and he liked it even less. It terrified him. He began to howl. Waldo opened his eyes.
Merciful heavens, he moaned. Can't you do something about that? He must be dying.
I'll see.
Grimes undid his safety belt and swung himself across the tank. The shift in weight changed the balance of the load in the gimbals. Waldo was rocked against the side of the tank.
Oh, he panted. Be careful.
Take it easy.
Grimes caressed the dog's head and spoke to him. When he had calmed down, Grimes grabbed a handful of hide between the dog's shoulders, measured his spot, and jabbed in a hypo. He rubbed the area.
There, old fella. That'll make you feel better.
Getting back caused Waldo to be rocked again, but he bore it in martyred silence. The ambulance made just one jerky maneuver after it entered the atmosphere. Both Waldo and the dog yelped. "Private ship!" the pilot yelled back. "Didn't heed my right-of-way lights." He muttered something about women drivers. Yikes.
It wasn't his fault,
Grimes told Waldo.
I saw it.
The pilot set them down with exquisite gentleness in a clearing which had been prepared between the highway and Schneider's house. A party of men was waiting for them there. Under Grimes' supervision, they unslung the tank and carried Waldo out into the open air. The evolution was performed slowly and carefully, but necessarily involved some degree of bumping and uneven movement. Waldo stood it with silent fortitude, but tears leaked out from under his lowered lids. I do have to wonder how they're going to get him back. Because, I acknowledge that they're working with, like, fancy, borderline magical technology, flying vehicles, but, like, I would think it requires a certain degree of, additional G's in order to just get out of the Earth's gravitational field. So, plus atmospheric resistance, plus... Anyway. I can't remember if Heinlein has us covered in that regard. Once outside, he opened his eyes and asked, "Where is Balder?"
"I unstrapped him," Grimes informed him, "but he did not follow us out."
Waldo called out huskily, "Here, Balder! Come to me, boy!" Inside the car, the dog heard his boss's voice, raised his head, and gave a low bark. He still felt that terrifying sickness, but he inched forward on his belly, attempting to comply. Grimes reached the door in time to see what happened. The dog reached the edge of his shelf and made a grotesque attempt to launch himself in the direction from which he had heard Waldo's voice. He tried the only method of propulsion he knew. No doubt he expected to sail through the air and arrest his flight against the tank on the ground. Instead, he fell several feet to the inner floor plates, giving one agonized yelp as he did so, and breaking his fall most clumsily with stiffened forelegs. I'm surprised he has the bone density to not just shatter. Because he's lived his entire life in 0G. Well, okay, free fall. Not quite the same thing. It's pretty similar, but not quite the same thing. Because they're in orbit. Anyway. Where were we? Oh, right. The dog, we'll just... Yeah. He lay sprawled where he had landed, making no noise, but not attempting to move. He was trembling violently. Grimes came up to him and examined him superficially, enough to assure him that the beast was not really hurt, then returned to the outside.
"Balder's had a little accident," he told Waldo. "He's not hurt, but the poor devil doesn't know how to walk. You had best leave him in the ship."
"I want him with..." Waldo shook his head slightly. "I want him with me. Arrange a litter." Grimes got a couple of the men to help him, obtained a stretcher from the pilot of the ambulance, and undertook to move the dog. One of the men said,
"I don't know as I care for this job. That dog looks vicious. Look at those eyes." "He's not," Grimes assured him. "He's just scared out of his wits. Here, I'll take his head." "What's the matter with him? Same thing as the fat guy?" "No, he's perfectly well and strong. He's just never learned to walk. This is his first trip to Earth." "Well, I'll be a cross-eyed owl." "I knew a case like it," volunteered the other. "Dog raised in Lunopolis. First week he was on Earth he wouldn't move. Just squatted down and howled and made messes on the floor."
"So is this one," the first said darkly.
"So has this one," the first said darkly.
They placed Baldur alongside Waldo's tub. With great effort, Waldo raised himself on one elbow, reached out a hand, and placed it on the creature's head. The dog licked it. His trembling almost ceased.
"There, there," Waldo whispered. "It's pretty bad, isn't it? Easy, old friend. Take it easy."
Baldur thumped his tail. Aw. It took 4 men to carry Waldo and 2 more to handle Baldur. Gramps Schneider was waiting for them at the door of his house. He said nothing as they approached, but indicated that they were to carry Waldo inside. The men with the dog hesitated.
"Him too,"
he said. The awe was for Waldo showing what seems, superficially at the very least, like empathy, which is all but a first. We've had some slight prelude to his capacity to care about other things than himself. Typically, they are not people, though. I admit there are days where I can relate. When the others had withdrawn, even Grimes returned to the neighborhood of the ship. Schneider spoke again.
"Welcome, Mr. Waldo Jones."
"I thank you for your welcome, Grandfather Schneider." The old man nodded graciously without speaking. He went to the side of Baldur's litter. Waldo felt impelled to warn him that the beast was dangerous with strangers, but some odd restraint, perhaps the effect of that enervating gravitational field, kept him from speaking in time. Then he saw that he need not bother. Baldur had ceased his low whimpering, had raised his head, and was licking Gramps Schneider's chin. His tail thumped cheerfully. Waldo felt a sudden tug of jealousy. The dog had never been known to accept a stranger without Waldo's specific injunction. This was disloyalty, treason. But he suppressed the twinge and coolly assessed the incident as a tactical advantage to him. Schneider pushed the dog's face out of the way and went over him thoroughly, prodding, thumping, extending his limbs. He grasped Baldur's muzzle, pushed back his lips, and eyed his gums. He then peeled back the dog's eyelids. He then dropped the matter and came to Waldo's side.
The dog is not sick, he said. His mind confuses. What made it?
Waldo told him about Baldur's unusual background. Schneider nodded acceptance of the matter. Waldo could not tell whether he had understood or not, and turned his attention to Waldo.
It is not good for a sprightly lad to lie abed. The weakness. How long has it had you?
All my life, grandfather.
That is not good.
Schneider went over him as he had gone over Baldur. Waldo, whose feeling for personal privacy was much more intense than that of the ordinary sensitive man, endured it for pragmatic reasons. It was going to be necessary, he felt, to wheedle and cajole this strange old creature. It would not do to antagonize him. To divert his own attention from the indignity he chose to submit to, and to gain further knowledge of the old quack, Waldo let his eyes rove the room. The room where they were seemed to be a combination kitchen-living room. It was quite crowded, rather narrow, but fairly long. A fireplace dominated the kitchen end, but it had been bricked up, and a hole for the flue pipe of the base burner had been let into the chimney. The fireplace was lopsided, as an oven had been included in its left side. The corresponding space at the right was occupied by a short counter which supported a tiny sink. The sink was supplied with water by a small hand pump which grew out of the counter. Schneider, Waldo decided, was either older than he looked, which seemed incredible, or he had acquired his house from someone now long dead. The living room end was littered and crowded in the fashion
Wah.
Let's try that again, shall we?
The living room end was littered and crowded in the fashion which is simply unavoidable in constricted quarters. Books filled several cases, were piled on the floor, hung precariously on chairs. An ancient wooden desk, crowded with papers and supporting a long obsolete mechanical typewriter, filled one corner. Over it, suspended from the wall, was an ornate clock, carved somewhat like a house. Above its face were two little doors. While Waldo looked at it, a tiny wooden bird. I just lost my place. Above its face were two little doors. While Waldo looked at it, a tiny wooden bird, painted bright red, popped out of the left-hand door, whistled the woo 4 times, and popped frantically back into its hole. Immediately thereafter, a little gray bird came out of the right-hand door, said cuckoo 3 times in a leisurely manner, and returned to its hole. Waldo decided that he would like to own such a clock. Of course, its pendulum and weight movement would not function in freehold, but he could easily devise a 1G centrifuge frame to enclose it, wherein it would have a pseudo-Earth surface environment. Could you actually do that? You might be able to. I wouldn't think that would be safe, because it would be spinning, wouldn't it? At the speed required to generate 1G, which is fairly fast. I used to know some of these figures. Getting old sucks. It might be less fast if it's a smaller object. I don't remember now. It's not. It's a problem. That's a problem. I don't like that. There's something about that I don't like. That smells wrong to me. I might be wrong. And if I am somebody smarter than I am, please interject. Anyway, the pendulum and weight movement would not function in freehold, but he could easily devise a 1G centrifuge frame to enclose it, wherein it would have a pseudo-Earth surface environment. Well, I guess if the centrifuge frame itself is the one doing the... Yeah, but doesn't the object itself have to... Because centripetal force, I thought, only works if you're close... Or centrifugal force for 0G stuff or free fall stuff. It doesn't help that my brain isn't in a good spot right now, so there's a bunch of stuff that I used to know that I do know I know, but can't remember that I know. Does that make any sense? It's not that I'm on drugs, it's that I'm on tired. That's what it is. It's worse than drugs. Anyway, there's something about that that smells like it wouldn't work, but I can't remember why it smells like it wouldn't work. Smells isn't the right word. It doesn't matter. Something sounds intuitively wrong about that statement. Anyway, it did not occur to him to fake a pendulum movement by means of a concealed power source. He liked things to work properly. To the left of the clock was an old-fashioned static calendar of paper. The date was obscured, but the letters above the calendar proper were large and legible. New York World's Fair. Souvenir of the world of tomorrow. Waldo's eyes widened a little and went back to something he had noticed before, sticking into a pincushion on the edge of the desk. It was a round plastic button mounted on a pin whereby it could be affixed to the clothing. It was not far from Waldo's eyes. He could read the lettering on it. Free silver, 16 to 1. Schneider must be old. I want to say that's a reference to something in the 1800s or early 20th century. And I know this only because there's a reference to it somewhere else. When I was looking up the history of actual Waldo manipulators in there by the story. Here we go. Here we go. Cultural references. The time in which the story is set is not mentioned. Skipping ahead. Schneider, whom MacLeod describes as being older than anybody, even when MacLeod was a child, he notices a campaign button on the wall of Schneider's house. The slogan on the button is Free Silver, a reference to the politics of the late 1800s in the United States. And it is specifically, free silver was a major economic policy issue in the United States in the late 19th century. Its advocates were in favor of an expansionary monetary policy featuring the unlimited coinage of silver into money on demand, as opposed to strict adherence to the more carefully fixed money supply implicit in the gold standard. Free silver became increasingly associated with populism, unions, and the perceived struggle of ordinary Americans against the bankers, monopolists, and robber barons of the Gilded Age. Hence, it became known as the people's money. Sounds like one of those nice, ideal ideal works in a vacuum, doesn't work in practice ideas that certain people like Heinlein would be attracted to. I imagine this probably did not work out very well. Skimming ahead here, peaked between 1893 to 1896. Right, because that's, there was a depression then. Free silver, blah, 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 blah. Do, 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 do. I'm not going to go and read this entire article. I'm sorry, that will not end well because we'll be here all day, and I'm running out of time. Suffice it to say, probably didn't have a lasting impact. Or if it did, the lasting impact is measured in in terms of how the establishment didn't made sure it would never happen again. But I don't know. I'm not an economics major, so this stuff probably won't make a mountain of sense to me right off rip anyway without delving into it. And we're not going to delve into it. Anyway, Schneider must be old. Schneider must be
Double hyphen.
old in italics and an exclamation point. There was a narrow archway which led into another room. Waldo could not see into it very well. The arch was draped with a fringe curtain of long strings of large ornamental beads. The room was rich with odors, many of them old and musty, but not dirty. Schneider straightened up and looked down at Waldo.
There is not wrong with your body. Get up. Get yourself and walk.
Waldo shook his head feebly.
I am sorry, grandfather. I cannot.
You must reach for the power and make it serve you. Try.
I am sorry. I do not know how.
That is the only trouble. All matters are doubtful unless one knows. You send your force into the other world. You must reach into the other world and claim it.
Where is this other world, grandfather?
Schneider seemed a little in doubt as to how to answer this.
The other world, he said presently, is the world you do not see. It is here, and it is there, and it is everywhere, but it is especially here.
He touched his forehead.
The mind sits in it and sends its messages through the body. Wait.
He shuffled away to a little cupboard, from which he removed a small jar. It contained a salve, or unguent, which he rubbed on his hands. He returned to Waldo and knelt down beside him. Grasping one of Waldo's hands in both of his, he began to knead it very gently.
Let the mind be quiet, he directed. Feel for the power. The other world is close and full of power. Feel it.
The massage was very pleasant to Waldo's tired muscles. The salve, or the touch of the old man's hand, produced a warm, relaxing tingle. If he were younger, thought Waldo, I would hire him as a masseur. He has a magnetic touch. Schneider straightened up again and said,
There, that betters you. Now you rest while I some coffee make.
Waldo settled back contentedly. He was very tired. Not only was the trip itself a nervous strain, but he was still in the grip of this damnable, thick gravitational field, like a fly trapped in honey. Gramps Schneider's ministrations had left him relaxed and sleepy. He must have dozed, for the last thing he remembered was seeing Schneider drop an eggshell into the coffee pot. Then the old man was standing before him, holding the pot in one hand and a steaming cup in the other. He set them down, got 3 pillows which he placed at Waldo's back, then offered him the coffee. Waldo laboriously reached out both hands to take it. Schneider held it back.
No, he reproved. One hand makes plenty. Do as I showed. Reach into the other world for the strength.
He took Waldo's right hand and placed it on the handle of the cup, steadying Waldo's right arm Steadying Waldo's right He took Waldo's right hand and placed it on the handle of the cup, steadying Waldo's hand with his own. With his other hand he stroked Waldo's right arm gently, from shoulder to fingertips. Again the warm tingle. Waldo was surprised to find himself holding the cup alone. It was a pleasant triumph. At the time he left Earth, 17 years before, it had been his invariable habit never to attempt to grasp anything with only one hand. In freehold, of course, he frequently handled small objects one-handed, without the use of Waldo's. The years of practice must have improved his control. Excellent! So, feeling rather cocky, he drank the cupful with one hand, using extreme care not to slop it on himself. It was good coffee, too, he was bound to admit. Quite as good as the sort he himself made from the most expensive syrup extract. Better, perhaps. When Schneider offered him coffee cake, brown with sugar and cinnamon and freshly rewarmed, he swaggeringly accepted it with his left hand, without asking to be relieved of the cup. He continued to eat and drink, between bites and sips, resting and steadying his forearms on the edges of the tank. The conclusion of the kaffeeklatsch seemed a good time to broach the matter of the DeKalbs. Schneider admitted knowing McLeod, and recalled, somewhat vaguely it seemed, the incident in which he had restored to service McLeod's broomstick.
Hugh Donald is a good boy, he said. Machines I do not like, but it pleasures me to fix things for boys.
Grandfather, asked Waldo, will you tell me how you fixed Hugh Donald McLeod's ship?
Have you such a ship you wish me to fix?
I have many such ships which I have agreed to fix, but I must tell you that I have been unable to do so. I have come to you to find out the right way.
Schneider considered this.
That is difficult. I could show you, but it is not so much what you do as how you think about it. That makes only with practice.
Waldo must have looked puzzled, for the old man looked at him and added,
It is said that there are two ways of looking at everything. That is true and less than true, for there are many ways. Some of them are good ways and some are bad. One of the ancients said that everything either is or is not. That is less than true, for a thing can both be and not be. With practice, one can see it both ways. Sometimes a thing which is for this world is a thing which is not for the other world, which is important, since we live in the other world.
We live in the other world?
How else could we live? The mind, not the brain, but the mind, is in the other world, and reaches this world through the body. That is one true way of looking at it, though there are others.
Is there more than one way of looking at DeKalb receptors?
Certainly.
If I had a set which is not working right brought in here, would you show me how to look at it?
It is not needful, said Schneider, and I do not like for machines to be in my house. I will draw you a picture.
Waldo felt impelled to insist, but he squelched his feeling.
You have come here in humility, he told himself, asking for instruction. Do not tell the teacher how to teach.
Schneider produced a pencil and a piece of paper, on which he made a careful and very neat sketch of the antennae sheaf and main axis of a sky car. The sketch was reasonably accurate as well, although it lacked several essential minor details.
These fingers, Schneider said, reach deep into the other world to draw their strength. In turn, it passes down this pillar,
he indicated the axis,
to where it is used to move the car.
A fair allegorical explanation, thought Waldo. By considering the other world simply a term for the hypothetical ether, it could be considered correct, if not complete. But it told him nothing.
Hugh Donald, Schneider went on, was tired and fretting. He found one of the bad truths.
Do you mean, Waldo said slowly, that McLeod's ship failed because he was worried about it?
How else?
Waldo was not prepared to answer that one. It had become evident that the old man had some quaint superstitions. Nevertheless, he might still be able to show Waldo what to do, even though Schneider did not know why.
And what did you do to change it?
I made no change. I looked for the other truth.
But how? We found some chalk marks.
Those? They were but to aid me in concentrating my attention in the proper direction. I drew them down so.
He illustrated with pencil on the sketch,
and thought about how the fingers reached out for power, and so they did.
That is all? Nothing more?
That is enough.
Either, Waldo considered, the old man did not know how he had accomplished the repair, or he had nothing to do with it. Sheer and amazing coincidence. He had been resting the empty cup on the rim of his tank, the weight supported by the metal while his fingers merely steadied it. His preoccupation caused him to pay too little heed to it. It slipped from his tired fingers, clattered and crashed to the floor. He was much chagrined. "Oh, I'm sorry, grandfather. I'll send you another."
No matter, I will mend.
Schneider carefully gathered up the pieces and placed them on the desk.
You have tired, he added. That is not good. It makes you lose what you have gained. Go back now to your house, and when you have rested, you can practice reaching for the strength by yourself.
It seemed a good idea to Waldo. He was growing very tired, and it was evident that he was to learn nothing specific from the pleasant old fraud. He promptly, emphatically, and quite insincerely He promised, emphatically and quite insincerely, to practice reaching for strength, and asked Schneider to do him the favor of summoning his bearers. The trip back was uneventful. Waldo did not even have the spirit to bicker with the pilot. Stalemate. Machines that did not work but should, and machines that did work but in an impossible manner. And no one to turn to but one foggy-headed old man. Waldo worked lackadaisically for several days, repeating, for the most part, investigations he had already made, rather than admit to himself that he was stuck, that he did not know what to do, that he was, in fact, whipped, and might as well call Gleason and admit it. The two bewitched sets of decalbs continued to work whenever activated, with the same strange and incredible flexing of each antenna. Other decalbs which had failed in operation and had been sent to him for investigation still refused to function. Still others, which had not yet failed, performed beautifully, without the preposterous fidgeting. For the umpteenth time he took out the little sketch Schneider had made and examined it. There was, he thought, just one more possibility. To return again to Earth and insist that Schneider actually do, in his presence, whatever he had done which had caused the decalbs to work. He knew now that he should have insisted on it in the first place, but he had been so utterly played out by having to fight that devilish thick field that he had not had the will to persist. Perhaps he could have Stevens do it, and have the process stereophotoed for a later examination. No, the old man had a superstitious prejudice against artificial images. He floated gingerly over to the vicinity of one of the inoperative decalbs. What Schneider had claimed to have done was preposterously simple. He had drawn chalk marks down each antenna so, for the purpose of fixing his attention. Then he had gazed down at them and thought about them, reaching out for power, reaching into the other world, stretching. Balder began to bark frantically.
Shut up, you fool!
Waldo snapped, without taking his eyes off the antennae. Each separate pencil of metal was wiggling, stretching. There was the low, smooth hum of perfect operation. Waldo was still thinking about it when the televisor demanded his attention. He had never been in any danger of cracking up mentally as Rambeau had done. Nevertheless, he had thought about the matter in a fashion which made his head ache. He was still considerably bemused when he cut in his end of the sound vision circuit.
Yes?
It was Stevens. "Hello, Mr. Jones. We wondered... that is..."
Speak up, man!
"Well, how close are you to a solution?" Stevens blurted out. "Matters are getting pretty urgent."
In what way?
"There was a partial breakdown in Great New York last night. Fortunately, it was not at peak load, and the ground crew were able to install spares before the reserves were exhausted, but you can imagine what it would have been like during rush hour. In my own department, the crashes have doubled in the past few weeks, and our underwriters have given notice. We need results pretty quick."
You'll get your results, Waldo said loftily. I'm in the final stages of the research.
He was actually not that confident, but Stevens irritated him even more than most of the smooth apes. Doubt and reassurance mingled in Stevens' face. "I don't suppose you could care to give us a hint of the general nature of the solution?" No, Waldo could not. Still, it would be fun to pull Stephen's leg. Come close to the pickup, Dr. Stevens. I'll tell you. He leaned forward himself until they were almost nose to nose. In effect. Magic is loose in the world. He cut the circuit at once. Down in the underground labyrinth of North America's home plant, Stevens stared at the blank screen. What's the trouble, Chief? McLeod inquired. I don't know. I don't rightly know. But I think that Fatty has slipped his cams, the way Rambeau did. McLeod grinned delightedly. Oh, sweet! I always did think he was a hoot owl. Stevens looked very sober. You had better pray that he hasn't gone nuts. We're depending on him. Now let me see those operation reports. And with that, we're going to call it for for this installment. We still have quite a bunch of book left. I forget where are you? There's Magic Incorporated? We've probably got what? Yeah, we've got one more of Waldo left in us. And then we'll do the second book that's story that's attached to this two-book collection called Magic Incorporated. So we'll do that as well, because that one's a fun one. Heinlein is one of those authors, and there's a number of them, who I feel really, truly excels in shorter form. I think almost everything that Heinlein's done that I really truly enjoyed has been either a short story or a smaller novella. His longer works tend to be a bit tend not to be quite as thrilling. He does great stuff with smaller concepts, where you don't have to let kind of the you don't have as many fridge moments where you're like, wait a minute, that didn't make any goddamn sense, did it? Great example of that is well, Stranger in a Strange Land is a good possibility, but also I Will Fear No Evil. I Will Fear No Evil still is one of like the books that has frustrated me most ever. It's like it's a very aggravating read. Because it's like, oh, here, let's have a story about a rich old fuck who who's a complete asshole and has his brain transplanted into his super hot, sexy female secretary, and proceeds to basically commune with her brain spirit about how much she's banged literally everyone he's ever met, and just everyone he's around. It's just like, wow, this is okay. How many more pages? Oh, like 400 pages of this? I don't think I can do it. It's yeah, it's a book. um, Stranger in a Strange Land at least is so weird and out there that I can give it some credit for like being kind of outside the box, but there's a bunch of stuff in there that's just like, oh, okay, that's uncomfortable. Let's not. But that's kind of Heinlein, unfortunately. That's one of his hallmarks. Uh, anyway, still some fun stuff to be had. Um, let's see. Optical antenna. Have to have it spin oriented. Oh, this is vis-a-vis the clock. Have to have it spin oriented with the top of the clock towards center of rotation. Yeah, that makes sense. Then the radius comes into equation with larger r. There are less RPM. Okay. With a radius of 1 meter, yeah, that sounds about right. About 30 RPM and 100 meters, 3 RPM. So it would be hard to read at reasonable radius. Yeah, so what's going through my head is it's like, okay, doesn't the whole object have to be spinning now? Okay. Because you can't just like put it in a thing that's just spinning around it, right? Because even then there's like, and then there's concerns about like air resistance. So it's like, okay, maybe it's a vacuum box. Which shouldn't impede anything but the fact that you won't actually hear the cuckoo. Unless you've got like microphones hooked up to the outside of the thing and it's vibrating through, but then there's a bunch of mechanical issues. RPM is 60 divided by pi, square root of g divided by r, where g is 9.8, m divided by s squared, and r in meters. Thank you. I'm going to forget all that in about 30 seconds, but keep that there. Hopefully anybody listening to this after the fact is able to see what AE Optical Antenna has posted, because these are pretty important. These help the understanding and illumination, rather, sorry. Anyway, so this has been a third of Waldo. We still have a bit left. I have way more covers downloaded than I needed, but that's okay. Hopefully people are enjoying this foundational work in making the whole mecha thing seem practical, even though we're totally dealing with like actual sorcery at this point. Or I guess you could we can make some interesting parables with the Gregg Egan book, Quarantine. There's some of that, I guess, in terms of just like weirdness, although that's about quantum probabilities and therefore a bit even more ooby shooby in some ways. This is like, I ain't gotta explain shit. Whereas that is, we'll explain it, but it's gonna make your brain melt. Don't think about it too hard. And you can't. At least one of the things I will always give Gregg Egan credit for, the thing that blows me away, is he's got on his website, greggegan.net. Oh, does he have a new book out? He has a new book out! God damn it! More things on my list. Oh, that sounds actually like it's attached to one of the short stories that I read that he did. He's got like explanations of kind of like what was going through his head or some of the science behind what he was exploring. Often he'll couch it as like, so things don't actually work this way, as far as we know. But if they did, they'd work something like this. This is why it would work, rather. Where is a good example of that? Did I read that one for... I don't know if I did. I hope I did. I might not have read the one that he did for Quarantine. Oh, sugar. Did he do one for Quarantine? There's a question. Okay, he definitely did one for Quarantine. No, that's the book. He had a... Quantum Mechanics in Quarantine. Oh, he's got a lot of these. No, I didn't read all these. That's okay. Oh, right. I know why. Because there's equations everywhere, and I can't read those aloud good. Because I've been out of the system too long. And it is very much true if you don't exercise certain parts of your brain, particularly when it comes to math, it is really hard to get back into shape for that, and I am a living testament to that. I don't think I read these aloud, no. Suffice it to say, maybe I did that one. No, I don't think I did. Well, that doesn't have equations everywhere. Anyway. Also, the range of force from top to bottom of clock is larger at smaller radius. At the foot would be 1g, but quite a bit less at top. You're right. Yes. Yes. See, I knew that was that part was going through my head. So I'm like, it doesn't, because it's a centrifuge. Things in the middle are different. No, the centrifuge thing wouldn't work. Which I think Heinlein is kind of calling out, being like, hey, he didn't think of the fact that he could just like attach a motor to simulate to make the pendulum go, as opposed to using weights. See, I understand how clocks work with pendulums and weights. I'm not so good with free fall dynamics of making one work. Anyway, suffice it to say, I think Heinlein maybe knew that it wouldn't work, but didn't want to spend time explaining why it wouldn't. I'd like to believe. I don't remember off the top of my head how much science background Heinlein had. I think he had an engineering background, if memory serves. Yes, aeronautical engineer. Yes. Anyway. With that, I'm going to run, because I got to run. Science! We try to have fun here. So I do have other streams throughout the week. If you're tuning into this after the fact, or just tuning in now, I do this every week on Mecha Mondays, where I do something Mecha adjacent or in giant rope. I don't remember my spiel anymore. Don't worry about it. Starting at about noon Eastern Standard Time, I do streams on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This week, we still have to look forward to. So Mondays are Mecha Mondays, where I do something giant robot related or Mecha adjacent. So you have to get into a specific rhythm to remember what the spiel is. My brain hurts. I don't think good on Mondays. I never used to have cases of the Mondays until I had to start working Sundays all the time. In addition to what I was already doing. Wednesdays right now are Wuxia Wednesdays. Wuxia, however that's pronounced, wherein we are reading actually Legends of the Condor Heroes, Book 1, A Hero Born by Jin Yang. It is some good kung fu antics. And then Fridays are Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. Right now we are getting into the final run-up to The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. We're almost done with this sucker, the Hyperion Cantos, and frankly, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself when we're done. I know exactly what I'm going to do with myself. I'm going to move on to the next book, which is going to be Destination Void by one Frank Herbert. I've never heard of the guy before. I don't think anyone else has either. Something about cat litter. I don't know. Something weird. Hydraulic despotism. Yeah, this is the penultimate installment, I think, unless for some reason I have my schedule cut short. At any rate, things are gonna be wild. Hopefully people enjoyed. This felt a little better than last week's. I was more distracted. And lower quality. Hopefully this week was better. But yeah, feel free to tune in live if you want. That's why they're so rough and unprofessional and unpolished. Because I do them live on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, starting at noon Eastern Standard Time, East Coast U.S. time, whatever. Some other blather I can't remember. I don't know. Nope, that's about it. Otherwise, it's all on the YouTube channel that I've got in the stream description. I usually update the playlists at least once a month to make sure they're all where they should be. I haven't made a playlist for this yet. I'll get around to that at some point. Was there some other point of order that I can't remember? No, I can't remember now. Nope. Anyway, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Thanks again to A Optical Antenna with his input vis-a-vis figuring out if you could make a cuckoo clock work in the centrifuge that Heinlein described. Using a centrifuge system that Heinlein described, I appreciate that very much. At any rate, see you all later. Until next time.